to 35 different programs. Sorry, I got a thing across my screen. To 35 different programs whose work has impacted thousands of students. We recently awarded 5 more grants for this coming year, including 2 new larger grants of $15,000 each. They will be presenting next fall after they've had a chance to implement their ideas. Though some of these grants are relatively modest in size, they have a huge impact in our communities, both in their first year when being implemented and often in the years that follow. And these projects can be replicated in other programs as well. This morning, we are joined by educators from 20 different programs, and between you reach more than 1,500 students. We're thrilled to be part of such great work, and we hope that you leave today with renewed energy and enthusiasm for your work and some great new ideas for your programs. We'd also like to welcome a few of our board members and donors who were able to join us today. Without their support, none of this would be possible, so thank you. And a special thank you to Brian McCormick, our program director, who put this event together. You'll be hearing from Brian later. Thanks, Brian. We're looking forward to all of the presentations. And as you know, we first have the honor of hearing from Dr. Rima Rudd, who is on faculty at the Harvard School of Public Health. She will be discussing with us the importance of health literacy as a shared responsibility. Dr. Rudd is a founder and leader in the field of health literacies. Her research and teaching initially focused on the design and evaluation of community-based public health programs. In the mid-90s, Rima began to focus her research studies on health disparities and literacy-related barriers to health information, health programs, and healthcare. She drafted the first national call to action, served on the Health Literacy Committee at the National Academies of Science, and developed the first population-based measure of health literacy. Rima could talk for hours on this subject, and she told us she has. So we're grateful that she is here with us, sharing some of her wisdom and experience this morning. We hope to have time to take some questions. So if you have a question or comment for Dr. Rudd, please put it in the chat as you think of it. And Brian will ask some of the questions of Rima afterwards. Rima this morning is having a bit of a technical difficulty. We can hear her, but she can't hear us. So we will be working that through. And that's why I'm going to be waving right now to let Rima know that we are ready for her to speak. So without further ado, I am turning the microphone over to Dr. Rima Rudd. Welcome, Rima.
Good morning. As I hope Terry told you, there is something wrong with my computer and I'm unable to hear. After I speak, I will switch to a phone so I can follow the rest of the conference. I'm really delighted to be with you this morning. And as you know, my field is public health. And I do want to talk to you this morning about health literacy and introduce what is a new and very exciting concept of health literacy that just emerged over the last few years. It gives us multiple ways to address issues and to improve health literacy. But before I do so, I'd like to talk a little bit about my work and my link to adult education and literacy. As you know, of course, I'm in the health sector. My work in public health was primarily a focus on community engagement and collaboration with the design and development of public health programs on all health topics and the evaluation of those programs. From the very start of my work in public health, I was very influenced by adult learning, adult education, and pedagogy. The most important influence of my work was the educator and literacy expert, Paulo Freire. As a matter of fact, I spoke on the 100th anniversary of his birth at a conference in Madrid virtually this past fall. Paulo Freire is a literacy expert who really transformed our understanding of how we build and share knowledge, how we work together. He stressed the importance of dialogue as the most intimate and important of human encounters. He put forth a pedagogy of liberation and freedom and really changed the way we think about students and teachers. His insistence on dignity, on respectful dialogue, really influenced, I would say, all of my work, my design of public health programs, my interactions with community, my interactions with policymakers, in addition to my teaching. So it really shaped my thoughts and my work. I think, too, of the collaborative work thereafter in the past 30 years that I've undertaken with adult educators and literacy experts. Some of you are online today, Barb Garner, Chris Smith, Lisa Soracone, Maricel Santos, how much we learned from each other, how much we contributed to each other's work. I must say, the perspective of adult education, how adults learn, what the challenges are, what society expects of adults, and what society prepares us for and doesn't prepare us for, had a tremendous influence, again, on all of my work. And then, of course, there was the survey, the Adult Literacy Survey, that was first launched in 1992 in the United States, and then thereafter in industrialized nations throughout the world, and repeated every several years. That survey in 1992 opened up a whole new world because our initial assumptions about literacy in industrialized nations was shaken. We thought that mandatory schooling until the age of 16 or 18 was going to solve all of the problems. We would now have a citizenry with very strong literacy skills, but that wasn't true. Our education system did not live up to the hype. We did not have the level of literacy that we had anticipated with mandatory schooling. And it was a shock to the nation. It was a shock to educators, to economists who were worried about readiness for the new economy in the 20th and 21st century. But amongst the small group of us in the health field, that also was a wake-up call, because we paused and said, aha, might there be a link between literacy skills and health outcomes? And thereafter, a group of us launched a whole series of research studies. And we found, after just a few years, that yes, there was a very strong link between literacy skills of patients and their health outcomes. For example, a patient who had diabetes has to manage a very sophisticated series of events and medicines and tests in order to control diabetes. And people with lower literacy skills did not do nearly as well as people with higher literacy skills in managing their disease. And I have to admit, at the time, a lot of mistakes were made by us, by the researchers in public health and in medicine. I'll give you an example of a colleague who had an aha moment. She said, well, now I get it. Now I understand why patient X is not able to manage his diabetes. He has low literacy skills. That aha moment was very faulty, because she acknowledges that it took her a while before she looked in the mirror and said, aha, maybe I don't have good communication skills. There's something else going on here. Maybe our system is set up in such a way that patients with diabetes are not able to get the information they need or want. It's not that they don't understand, perhaps we're not providing them with what they need. So there was a little bit of a twist, a little bit of a change that was taking place early on in the research. But it took a while before people began to think about literacy in a very different way. And it took some help from the adult education field, from literacy experts. I think about Victoria Purcell Gates and the insight that she was able to offer. She said, you're making a profound mistake. You're thinking about literacy as a characteristic of an individual instead of an exchange. And we took that very seriously, and we started rethinking our work. Literacy is indeed an exchange. It's an exchange between a speaker and a listener. You can't judge the skills of a listener without understanding the communication skills of a speaker. You can't judge the skills of a reader unless you're really assured that the writer did a very good job, was coherent, was clear. And that aha moment for those of us in public health was very profound, and it was very important because we were leaving out of our research very important, what we call variables, very important components. We were not examining closely the skills of the speaker. You know, it's ironic. People get very excited about building tools. We have over 150 tools to assess the skills of a patient. The reading and literacy skills of patients. We don't have a single tool that assesses the skills of the practitioner who is providing the important information. So there's a bias here, there's a problem here. And we indeed began to give more and more thought to this, that literacy is an interaction that takes place between speakers and listeners, between writers and readers. And it takes place in a context, and the context is extraordinarily important as well. That context, for example, in a hospital or doctor's office setting, must include the feelings and emotions and health and well-being. Someone who is feverish, who is frightened, who is concerned for their child, cannot listen in the same way as someone who is fully relaxed. That's an emotive context. But the other context of the formality of the setting, of the noise, of the odd language that's being used in that setting, also influences people's ability to learn, to hear, to listen, to engage. And so we started making a change in our understanding of health literacy. And those of us, me and several other people who were concerned about the issue of context, started developing a new understanding of health literacy. And so I have a little slide that shows this new model. And Brian, if I may ask you to, on your screen, to show that slide, and I'll talk through it once it's up. This new model illustrates the fact that literacy, and health literacy especially, is a shared exchange. I'll just pause for a moment. Not up. Okay, oh, there we go. Okay. Great. So when we think about health literacy is at the intersection of skills, of texts, of tasks, and of contexts. And I'm going to explain with the help of the next slide what I mean by each of those things. So when I talk about skills with health literacy, yes, I am talking about skills of individuals, skills of patients, skills of the lay public, the literacy and numeracy skills of people in our society. And we know that they're relatively weak. They're not as strong as we had formally assumed that they were. But we're also talking about the skills of professionals, the communication skills of those who speak to us, those who get on television and talk about the pandemic, those who are explaining a disease and its consequences. We're also talking about the skills of people who are putting up charts of data, who are giving us our test results and using numbers. And we have to ask, are they doing it in a way that makes it easy for us to follow and easy for us to understand? Sadly, so far, the research is saying, no, those skills are not what they ought to be. When we talk about text, I'm using Victoria Purcell Gates's concept here that text doesn't just mean the written word on a page, but when she uses the word text, she also means talk. She also means postings. She also means the writing that we're doing, the pamphlets that we give to patients, the explanations that we offer in the office, the postings on the signs within a hospital. So all of these texts are an issue as well. If they're not clear, if they're not focused, if they're not in the same language, then they're problematic. We're not using text the way they should be used as a teaching tool, as a vehicle for communication. There have been well over 3,000 studies in peer-reviewed journals that show that the texts in health are really very dense, and that many people, most people who are not schooled in health disciplines, have difficulty understanding the text. Next, I want to talk about tasks, another part of health literacy, the activities that we expect people to undertake. Tasks involve being able to read and understand a label on a medicine bottle, being able to take action and take that medicine as you're supposed to. So there are many, many tasks, getting ready for a health exam and following a particular protocol so that your body is indeed prepared for that test. Taking care of a child who is ill and following a protocol, treating a wound after it's been cared for in medicine, but once you go home to be able to clean it properly. These are tasks that we undertake on a daily basis. And indeed, they're very often not communicated well, and they're very often harder than they need to be. Context. These contexts is the atmosphere, the physical layout of an office or a hospital, the practice norms within that institution, structural facilitators and barriers that are part of our very system, applying for help, filling out a form when you get into a medical center, answering questions about esoteric things such as the number of siblings you have. We, in everyday parlance, don't talk about our siblings. We talk about our brothers and sisters. But the forms that you're filling out use very formal language. There are many, many structural facilitators and barriers, indeed, in our health system. So health literacy is at the center of these interacting factors. And in order to take action for health literacy, in order to improve health literacy, we need to improve each of these areas. Need to improve certainly the skills of individuals, and the adult education sector is doing its best in an underfunded, difficult way to improve skills of the learners who come to them. We also need the assistance and help of the adult education system in helping us improve the skills of professionals, mind you. The medical schools, the nursing schools, the pharmacy schools are not doing enough. Certainly enough as far as knowledge transfer is concerned, building professionalism, but not enough in communicating well with the public, in learning the language of your trade, but also maintaining the language of everyday parlance and being able to communicate well. Our texts need to be improved. And again, we need your help and we need your assistance in pointing out what is difficult, what is easy for people to understand. I did a series of tours in local hospitals, first in the Boston area and then in New York, with adult educators, and in many instances with adult learners. We had well over 100 tours with adult learners in hospital settings, where we simply walked the hallways of large hospitals and we asked people, what helps you find your way and what gets in the way? And people consistently pointed out that it was very difficult to differentiate between medical jargon, these very fancy words like pulmonology, and the name of a donor that is the name of a particular wing. How do you find your way amongst all these very confusing words was just one example of help that we were able to get. Words that I took for granted. Here's the mammography center. And someone looked at me and said, what do you mean by mammography? What does that sign mean? What is it telling me? There was humor on both sides, but it was extraordinarily helpful in helping us, schooled in health, understand what we took for granted cannot be taken for granted for others. We also looked together at the activities to be undertaken. So one of the things that I worked on with the help of colleagues that I mentioned, I'll just show it. It's a very cumbersome book here. But we developed a series of facilitated exercises for adult educators to take part in health literacy study circles and think about how they would go about integrating health-related topics into their normal everyday work in improving language skills and improving math skills. And we integrated a lot of the findings that we had from adult learners and from adult educators into these study circle guides. As a matter of fact, we also integrated, excuse me for disappearing for a moment, a lot of the work that we did on the tours in putting together an assessment tool for professionals in hospitals to be able to assess the literacy demands of their hospital and make sure that they took away barriers so that people had more access, not only to entry, but to navigation and to dignity, so that you feel that you can indeed navigate a system because it's not foreign territory. It is geared towards you. It is built in such a way that is make it helpful for you to enter with ease, to feel dignified, to feel comfortable, and to be able to address your needs and find help for that. So this model that shows health literacy and all the various key components of health literacy gives us a lot of work to do, together. It eases the burden. It takes the responsibility for health literacy off the shoulders of the adult learner, off the shoulders of the citizen, off the shoulders of the adult who is a member of the lay public. And it says this is a shared responsibility. This is a shared burden. You have to be clear, and I have to listen. I have to explain, and you have to listen. We need to find a way to establish a dialogue that's respectful, where we're both speaking the same language, where we're listening and talking to one another, in an atmosphere that is supportive. And if health literacy can maintain that kind of focus, we're a long way towards making a difference. I very strongly feel that literacy is at the core of inequities in our society. But I don't mean just the skills of individuals. I mean the literacy that is in exchange. If we're not talking respectfully to others, they can't possibly listen to us. We really do need to have that kind of shared knowledge and build knowledge together. People talk about, this is sort of a new term that's been introduced in the health field recently, the democratization of knowledge, so that all of us have access to important information. All of us have opportunities building on our experience, building on our insights to contribute to building knowledge. And we can only do that through this dignified dialogue, talking to each other on the same level, in the same way, in a very respectful way. So my work has been influenced by this. Your work certainly is making a tremendous contribution. And I think that we have more work to do together in the long run. I think about a project that I was involved in Fukushima, Japan, where scientists after the disaster, I'm sorry, I should explain what I meant by not just the city Fukushima, Japan, but there was that awful disaster where there was an earthquake followed by a tsunami, followed by the meltdown of a nuclear power plant and radiation raining down. It was a triple level disaster. Years after, there were problems in society because scientists were giving information to policymakers. Policymakers were taking that same information and were spreading it out to practitioners, to doctors and nurses who were speaking with community residents. the community residents became furious. They no longer trusted the practitioners. Why? Because nobody bothered to do translation. The scientists didn't translate their scientific jargon when they were communicating with the policymakers. In truth, many of the policymakers did not know what the scientists were saying, but they transferred that information to the doctors and nurses who didn't necessarily understand the scientific jargon either. And then they spoke the scientific jargon to community, and communities were saying, what are they talking about? They're not talking to us. They don't care about us. They're not meeting our needs. And things began to break down. Thankfully, I was able to work with some colleagues, and they developed almost like health literacy classes for nurses who began to be able to translate the jargon and be able to speak to people in their own terms yet again. We have work to do. You are making a tremendous contribution already. I hate to do this, but I ask you to keep going and to do even more and help us in the field of health literacy. Keep on target. Keep remembering that we have a profound responsibility to bring about a change. And hopefully we can feed back to you some of our successes and some of our learnings and really help you and your learners as well. So with much appreciation for the work that you do, I'm going to end my talk and try to get on the phone. But if there's time and people are able, if Brian is able to type in some questions from the audience, I'd be happy to answer a few questions. I won't be able to hear them, but I can read them online.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rudd. We really appreciate your comments and shining a light on this really critical topic, especially now with everything our society is going through. I'm going to pause just for a minute to see if there's any questions, and then we'll continue with our event. Great. So now I have the pleasure to talk about our hardworking program partners that make such a big difference in the lives of our students, who in turn make our state a better place for all of us to live. We are thrilled to have partnered with 6 organizations in fiscal year 2021, and I've really watched them turn this funding that we distributed into prosperity and learning for their students. Today we will be hearing from 6 organizations. We'll be hearing from the YMCA International Learning Center, from Grace Murray and Sarah Poole. We'll be hearing from the Gilbert Albert Community Center from Tom Mcdonald. We'll be hearing from the International Institute of Lowell and Caroline Rowe. We'll be hearing from Mujeres Unidas Avanzando from Katie Shelby. We'll be hearing from the International Institute of Boston from Natalie Patalino. And we'll be hearing from the Care Center and Holyoke Community College Adult Learning and Alison Reed. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to the YMCA International Learning Center. And as you hear their presentations, if you have questions, please type them in the chat, and if there's time at the end, they will answer them. So Grace and Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us today. I'm Sarah Poole. I'm the Director of New American Welcome Centers and Workforce Initiatives at the Y of Greater Boston. I oversee the Education and Training branch, which consists of our adult ESOL programs and a workforce development program that trains for careers in administrative office skills. Today I'm here representing the International Learning Center and the ESOL programs, where we're thrilled to have been a recipient of First Literacy Lab grants for several years now. We're just so grateful for First Literacy's support and for the opportunities to bring innovative programming to our students and to serve our students in fun and engaging ways. So I will now turn it over to Grace Murray, who's the project lead for this year's project, to highlight the project and the amazing student work that came from it.
Thanks, Sarah. Excuse me. And thanks so much, Brian and First Literacy for having us. Like Sarah said, we're from YMCA of Greater Boston. We are the International Learning Center. I'm Grace, and I'm the recruitment manager at our school. So when the labs were released last year, let me share my screen really quickly. When the labs were released last year, it was very much the situation of COVID, right? And so brainstorming was really a lot about how can we think about moving what was a fully in-person school. We really had no hybrid services. We weren't offering online services at the time that COVID started. And so how can we create new programs online? And so the Connection Project was born from that. So I think that's probably a similar thought process for a lot of the literacy grant labs that came out of that time as well. In March, our center closed, as I'm sure a lot of other programs did as well. And in May, we started launching online pilot classes for our school. Like I said, that was a brand new idea for us. And it was almost a silver lining because as a program, we had always wanted to break into online learning. And so, we were forced to basically because of the pandemic. So in October, we were able to launch the First Literacy Grant program. The program was called the Connection Project. And we marketed it to current and previous students as a multimedia class. And it ran for 4 months. So the goals of the course was really to foster a space where students could express themselves in a way that in traditional ESOL courses, it just doesn't happen. Maybe it does occasionally, but not to the extent that we were aiming for in this course. So there were 4 main course goals: provide a space for self-expression, provide instruction on digital media. And for the course, we had 4 main types of media: blog writing, photography, videography, and video editing. The third goal was to increase English proficiency. And number 4 was a goal for the International Learning Center. Like I said, we were creating new online programs that we had never worked with before. So it helped to create structures at our school that have continued to serve us. This is our second fiscal year of completely online programming. I want to pause very briefly and just point out that since photography was part of the course, all of the photos here that you can see were done by students, and I tried to give them credit throughout the slideshow. I think throughout the course, the number one challenge for me as a teacher and for the students was just working with technology. Certainly digital literacy was a barrier. Getting through the basics of opening Zoom and using Zoom as our platform for classes. But later on, we had to deal with different operating systems. We used a variety of platforms for learner management. Then we had to download software for students to be able to edit videos. And the video editing was probably where we met the most challenges, because as you're working within a video editing software, students have to know the vocabulary of videos. So things like play, pause, fast forward, but then also the editing side, which could include cutting, slicing, transitions, scenes. You know, we had to work a lot with technical aspects of the videos, like how to remove sound from a video clip and replace it with music in the background. So all of these different complexities really added to the challenge, but students really came away with a lot of knowledge and completely surpassed, I think, their own expectations, but also mine. I think I probably mentioned it before, but we did have 4 main course assignments. I asked students to write about the pandemic in a way that highlighted their own emotions, their struggles that they were going through at the time. The second assignment was blog writing, where they were able to choose a topic of their own choice, photography, and, as I mentioned before, videography. So for the rest of the presentation, I would really just love to highlight the student work that came out of the course. So these 2 excerpts were from the writing about the pandemic. And I highlighted 2 students here, Ali and Myra. So Ali wrote, "We can find some positive facet from this coronavirus grief if we set a goal during the pandemic period, which might be an assistant for us to go through the transition. We do an effort to approach the goal. We will celebrate not only for termination of the pandemic, but also we achieve our destination." So something that many students reported, and I think Ali is writing about this here, was, you know, in the middle of the pandemic, there was very few things to do, right? Students weren't sure if they could go outside, if they could see other people. And just having programming like the multimedia class, it was a huge relief for students to feel a little bit of normalcy in coming to a class, even though it was online, being able to talk with other students and talk with me and continue working on their English, right? And Myra, on the right side here, wrote a little bit more about the general struggles that she was facing at the time. "It's definitely not easy. Sometimes I feel like I have to be there for everybody, help my kids and husband, do the things in the house, and even help my mother, who came from Peru in February, and due to the COVID, hasn't been able to go back there. This year has been a really hard year. Sometimes I feel tired of just trying to make each day count for my family. I want them to feel that we tried our best and stayed strong and together during this difficult time." Let's continue on and look at some more photography from the students. During the photography portion of the course, we talked about the kind of the basic rules for photography that some of you might know, is how to find a focal point, how to create depth in a photo. There's certain photography rules, like the rule of thirds. And so we talked about all that during the course, and students were able to practice talking about the rules, figuring out if a photo was following the rules or not. And as you can see here, they really came out with wonderful photography. And I think one of the best parts about this is you don't need a fancy camera these days, right? It became very accessible for students on their cell phones, and they had a wonderful time going out, practicing the photography, you know, getting outside of the house in some cases, and having a little project to work on. Finally, I wanted to show a excerpt of a video from one of the students. This was called Green Heart Garden, shot by Valentina. And
So
in
this
her work, she had a pen pal from another state, and she interviewed the pen pal over Zoom. And her friend also sent her some videos of her garden. So I'll show you a little bit from the beginning, and then we can skip on.
this is Andrea Drummy. She is growing her own garden and she lives in Tennessee. And she will be talking to us about her gardening and giving us some techniques.
Hello.
I'm sorry. I'll skip forward a little bit.
How much I was spent.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That one little click just.
Are you currently growing?
Right now, because of the time of year, I'm kind of limited. I've got some cabbage that's growing. I've got some collard greens and some kale, as well as a little bit of broccoli. And then I have garlic and onions that won't be ready until early summer of next year, but they're in the ground and they're currently growing as well.
Okay. And what are your plans for the future? Are you planning to keep it like a hobby or make it like a business model?
So I'm hoping to make it be my business and, keep it as well as maintain a passion for it as well.
So I just wanted to show a little clip of that video, which I thought was an excellent example of her creating an interview. So she had questions to ask her friend. We had some awesome video editing there, cutting to different scenes, using music over that. And that's just some of the work that came from the class. And I'm really happy to say that we have a live blog, a website. So I would love to share that in the chat here. And the website allows students to continue browsing the work. They can show it to friends and family. And I hope you all enjoy checking out more of the work on the website as well. I think that's it for my part. I don't know, Brian, if we have time to answer questions or if we're over time.
We have a couple minutes left. One question from Stephanie was wondering, was being matched by a pen pal part of the course, or did she do that on her own?
Valentina was really motivated, and she actually had her own pen pal, probably from, I think she said from before the pandemic they had connected. So it was a great use of that connection, but unfortunately wasn't part of the course.
Great. And just one more question from David, is asking if you'll be able to continue to offer the multimedia class as an online or hybrid model. Do you think the skills that students develop, including photography, video, interviewing, and English language skills, help students with their occupation and education goals? So 2 questions there.
Yeah, great question, David. So right now, there aren't plans to continue the multimedia course, but I think that by showcasing how we can teach these skills, they can then be integrated into one of our regular ESOL courses. And we continue offering courses year-round, thanks to grants from Department of Education, English for New Bostonians, of course, First Literacy, other courses like this. And to answer the second question about occupational and educational goals, very generally, absolutely. But something that I was trying to focus on in the course was really the centering on self-expression. And maybe it's not connected in a traditional sense, but I think that students being able to express themselves and put English words to how they're feeling It's critical for any interpersonal skills that they're going to use going forward.
Great. Well, thank you, Grace. When we think of, having our funds be used to help students prosper, being able to communicate in a variety of ways is certainly important for prospering. And so we really appreciated your work on this project, and you've been a great partner to First Literacy. So thank you, Grace, and thank you, Sarah, from the YMCA. We will now move on to our friends at the Gilbert Albert Community Center, and Tom Mcdonald. I think you're muted, Tom. Tom, we can't hear you yet.
He's unmuted.
Oh, something changed. Yeah, we can hear you, Tom.
Okay.
There he is. And can you spotlight him, Brian?
So I'm working as a literacy teacher at, we call it GACC, and it's actually quite confusing. It's quite confusing trying to talk about the letter G, because in Haitian Creole, G is spelled, is said J, and J is said G. So we have a hard time making sure that everyone knows that in English we say Gilbert, but in French or Creole we would say Gilbert. Not important. So I as a literacy teacher, I came to a Kahoot workshop at First Literacy 3 or 4 years ago, and about using smartphone in the classroom. And I was really intrigued with one of the programs that was introduced. It was called Kahoot. And I'm not sure if you want to see the presentation. You can certainly put it up if you want, Brian. I just quickly to tell you that, first of all, Kahoot is used by teachers in a variety of disciplines all over the world. So, and it's so there's lots of Kahoots because it's open source. Anything that any teacher has created, you can duplicate, you can edit. There's quite a lot of ESL lessons. They vary in quality. My experience with Kahoot is that with a little practice, you can get pretty good at creating a lesson to reinforce what you taught on any given day, that students then have on their phone in a kind of a game-like format. They can check when they're on the bus. They can check while they're sitting at home. It can be 2 or 3 minutes or 10 minutes at a time. It's a great reinforcement for them. Kahoot integrates text and illustration. You can even include video in your Kahoot lesson that you make. And this actually took me a bit to figure out. The Kahoot that you can see on a computer, which is basically through the web browser, is not the same as what's on the phone. And if a student registers an account at how do I get to the next page, Brian? So if they register an account, then there are two forms of interaction. The challenge is a timed sort of game. So if there are 10 questions, you can actually say how much time you want to give. It counts down. I'll show you a screen. You can make 4 choices, one of which is correct. But if a student makes an account on Kahoot, which is free, there's also what Kahoot calls a study mode. And when you're studying the lesson, you can practice it, which means go through it without any time limit, or there's a flashcard mode. So for me, this is a really it's a good sequence. The first one, you see 4 answers. Maybe it's a close exercise. There's a word missing. You see the 4 answers. You look for the one that's right, and you can practice that as much as you want. And in the flashcard mode, you see the sentence with and you need to remember or have learned what the word is that's missing, and then you can flip the flashcard to see to confirm that you've gotten the right answer. Do I ask you, Brian, for next screen? Thanks. So I tried to make a little pro and con list. I fell way on the pro side, but I think it's fair to say that Kahoot is not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of, as Brian knows, there's a lot of stumbles that are possible along the way. Mostly just to get started. And particularly last year, it was hard because we were virtual. So we were trying to learn a new technology in a virtual format. So it was hard. But the pros, as I see them, that you can do it anytime, anywhere on your phone. That it's multimodal. There's a variety of ways to interact. There's a variety of ways to create lessons. There's this. I'm not sure what to say about the game part of it. I think gaming can be engaging for students. I'm still trying to figure that out. The cons, as I was saying, are that the registration is somewhat involved. It basically involves having an email address, and if students don't have an email address, then you have to create that first. If they've forgotten their password, then we have to reset the password. It can take time, and and it can be frustrating. Next screen, Brian. So I've written some here. I think if you want to read it at your leisure, I'm not going to read it out loud for you. Basically trying to describe my experience using Kahoot. Next screen, Brian. And next screen again. This just is some of my thoughts about the humps that you have to get over. I still am pretty convinced that it's worth the trouble, but I have to say it's an experiment still for me, especially at the literacy level. I think at a higher ESL level, there's a lot that you can do with it. So this is on the left here is what the screen looks like when you get to Kahoot.com. And this is the way that I got my students once they were registered through WhatsApp on the right. I just copy a link to the exercise that I've made. Next screen, Brian. So once a student has registered on their mobile device, they click on the link that I've sent them in WhatsApp. And here you see that, so this was spelling match was what I called it. And you see that there's the blue study button and the green play button. So the play would be with the timed limit. And, but next screen, Brian. So if you click on the study button, then you can, the order that I've found works best is to practice first. And to practice, you have to explain that you have to click on the green play next to practice. And that gets you to the exercise with no timed format. So students can spend as long as they want looking at the choice of answers. And then the flashcards, as I explained to you, is a way to sort of see if they've gotten it internalized. I haven't used this at the bottom. It says challenge. It means that a student can actually send this exercise to other students, and they can join a challenge. And the challenge could be for a day or 3 days. And it's the timed version of the exercise. And at the end of the challenge, you can see the order of students, how well they did. The numbers are basically, I think, how quickly you choose your answer. The quicker you choose, the higher your score. I haven't used that, but I do wonder if that's a nice invitation for students to challenge each other. Next screen, Brian. And here's just an example of a question. So you see at the top, blank name is Jeanette. I made this for one student in particular. And then at the bottom, you have the 3 choices. And if you click on the right choice, there's a nice big green banner that says correct. And if you don't get it right, then it says incorrect, but try again.
Hey, Tom, this is great, and we're out of time. We need to move on to our next presenter. When I read this project for the first time, visualizing students being on the bus or at a break from work and them struggling on a certain topic, and you being able to make a Kahoot for them that they can practice on their own is really powerful. That really being able to practice on their own through their phone, is something that we really appreciate about this project. So thank you very much, and we'll be sharing this slide and more information about Kahoot with everybody next week.
Great. Can I just say one last thing, Brian?
Of course.
Yeah, if you, I'm sorry, my timing wasn't good. If you read the presentation and you're at all curious about it, let me know. I'm happy to help you get started. I'd love to sort of keep experimenting with it with other teachers. I'm a low-level literacy teacher, but I've worked with higher-level students, so I'm really curious to know if it's interesting to you and if you'd like to make a little team. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tom. And now I'm going to turn it over to the International Institute of Lowell and Caroline Rowe.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I will share my screen. My name is Caroline Rowe. I am the Lowell Managing Director at the International Institute of New England. Thank you for having me, and thank you First Literacy for gathering all of us here. I think it's great. Okay, so we ran an alternative ESOL program, but first a little bit about IANE. We create opportunities for refugees and immigrants to succeed through resettlement, education, career advancement, and pathways to citizenship. We have an office in Lowell and in Boston. You will be hearing from my colleague Natalie, who's at our Boston office later. And we also have an office in Manchester. We started in 1918, so we started in one pandemic and are working through the next. So kind of like what Grace said, a lot of what we did on this alternative ESOL program was based around COVID. First, so we offer refugee resettlement, case management, ESOL, employment support, Central American family reunification, legal immigration services, interpretation and translation, and training programs. So during COVID, we switched everything to an online platform, and our regular ESOL programs operate Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, 9 through 12, and are for multi-level students. So when we switched to a remote model, we had a couple challenges or changes. One of them being that a lot of our students now had to support their children with online learning and weren't able to attend our class in the morning. A lot of shifts and work schedules changed. And then, making sure everyone had access to the online platform. So we really created this alternative ESOL program to support those students that weren't able to attend our morning ESOL, that were, waiting to get into other ESOL programs, and those that were very low literacy, so that we could make sure they were able to get the extra support and the time that they needed, instead of joining our larger morning class. And so this alternative ESOL works to partner volunteers with our ESOL students one-on-one on a remote platform, Zoom or WhatsApp, depending what works best for the student. So we had a number of volunteers. Most had previously been volunteers in our morning ESOL class. So how we run our ESOL class is an hour of instruction with the teacher and the whole group. And then we do breakout groups after, pairing volunteers and students. So we already had somewhat of a model in place. But then this alternative ESOL really utilized our volunteers' expertise and made the one-on-one matches with our students. So we provide a volunteer training to all of our volunteers. And we also, make sure that they have all the materials that they need, and have monthly check-ins with our ESOL teacher to discuss, how the meetings are going, what materials are needed, and to support that one-on-one teaching. So how are the matches made? So, a lot of it is logistics of who's available when. So making sure that the schedules are discussed and agreed upon, and making sure that the technology works. So some students, it was all through WhatsApp, others it was through Zoom, and then making sure that we had the links and the tools all set up with the volunteer and the student. And for the volunteers to support the student, we have a number of resources that they access and utilize. So we have our teacher, Sherry, has a website where she posts weekly resources and lessons. So our teachers can follow those resources with the students. Also, each volunteer and student is provided with an Oxford Picture Dictionary so that they can go through that together in the sessions. And then English grammar books are also given to the students, and then a PDF is given to the volunteers so that they can go through the books together. And then we have a series of other resource materials, such as literacy flashcards. Some students were preparing for their citizenship exam, so we also had citizenship books and citizenship flashcards. And then many of our volunteers, some were former teachers themselves, so some of them do create their own lessons. And then in addition, so for the students, all students, we did loan laptops to our students, and they have the dictionaries and the same resources as the volunteers. And they also have access to this, our teacher's website, where they can go through lessons. And then, so we created a new system for documentation over the last year and really utilized shared drives and Google Documents. So we created a Google document attendance sheet form where the volunteer tutors can fill in attendance and document it. And then we also have a volunteer log where they can track the activities and achievements that they do with that they work with each student. And on the top of the volunteer log, I'll show you an example of it in a moment. We also have the students' short-term SMART goals, so that every day when the volunteer goes on and documents what they worked on with the student, they also are able to see the student's goals and also able to work with the student on those goals and document progress. And then our teacher also has access to these logs, so they are able to regularly check in, document progress, look at things how are going, and check in. And so here's an example of our volunteer log. So we have, we would put the SMART goals of the student here, and then after each meeting or during each meeting, the volunteer would document the activities, next steps, time, and date. And then I have an example here of what that log entry would be. So, the volunteer would write activities of vocabulary, parts of the body, grammar book, simple present, presentations, greetings, and then YouTube video, and then would note about how it was going. So that the student was right on time today and she knew almost all of the parts of the body. This was her best vocabulary performance so far. So through these logs, we are able to, track progress and really provide that support to the volunteers as needed. And then some additional support that we offered for volunteers. The Education and Youth Manager, Sherry, offers monthly meetings with all of the volunteers to check in. And then during these meetings, she provides new resources, lesson ideas, and also gives volunteers an opportunity to share lessons and resources. Sometimes it would be, all volunteers are, saying we have a challenged with this, or we're really having challenges with attendance, or showing up on time, or accessing Zoom links, and really working through and discussing how we would solve that problem and how to move forward. And then regular check-ins with the volunteers. And this is an example agenda of what that monthly meeting check-in would be. So providing all those resources, curriculum resources, and discussing needs, challenges, successes, and making sure all volunteers are also documenting the hours that they support. And then for our program outcomes, we had 9 students that were matched with volunteer tutors, and 8 volunteer tutors were trained and matched. So one of our volunteers worked with 2 students, and we had over 250 hours of attendance that was logged. 4 of the 9 students attended enough hours to be post-tested using Best Plus standardized tests, and all 4 achieved a measurable skill gain. And students and tutors developed meaningful connections that made a positive experience for both. I think what was maybe one of the greatest outcomes, I think the volunteers and the students, beyond achieving improvement and getting a better score on the Best Plus, they really created a relationship and a mentor relationship. And the volunteers were not only able to check in and ask about how to better teach, but really created a meaningful connection, and were supporting our students with their next academic step or their next career step, or we're able to then talk to our teacher about how to further support them in other aspects of their life. So I think that might be another outcome that isn't necessarily always measured. But yeah, and that's all I have. So thank you. And please let me know if you have any questions.
Great, thank you, Caroline. We have one question, which I think is a big question. I don't know if you can answer it. Mary O'Neill asks, how do older adults manage to learn online?
Yeah, good question. I don't know what our average age of students were. I think, the majority of our students are new to online, new to computers, really had minimal and low digital literacy. So I think we had a challenge with, everyone at first, getting them up and going on Zoom or on the computers. What we are doing now is we are offering, kind of based on this experience, we're offering a digital literacy program to all of our ESOL students, and we are having them come in person for the first time, showing them how to use the computer. And that is also something we did socially distanced during COVID. And I will say a lot of those first sessions were focused on how to access the Zoom link, how to get online. And I think we really utilized WhatsApp a lot more at the beginning, and then slowly transitioned to Zoom as it worked.
Great. Well, Caroline, thank you so much. Adding the support to the adult learners to give them, not only this technical success, but, the emotional support they get from their tutors is, they're in a really hard position, as everyone knows. And so, giving them that extra support really made a big difference. So thank you so much for your work and your project this year. And thank you for presenting.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm just going to do a quick reminder. When we have this event in person, you may remember in-person events from a long time ago. You might come in a few minutes early, and you might chat, you might ask questions, you might go up to someone you don't know and say, "Hey, my name is Brian. It's nice to meet you." It's super hard to replicate that here, so we're going to have a totally voluntary networking session after this. It'll be 10, maybe 15 minutes. So if you'd like to network, if you're an attendee, if you're a panelist, you're welcome. It'll be a different Zoom link. So I will post that at the very end in the chat. So if you'd like to attend, if you can come for a few minutes, not the full time, we would welcome you to do some networking. So that's a little plug for that. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our friends at Mujeres Unidas Avanzando and Katie Shelby.
Hello, can you hear me okay, Ryan?
Yes.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. I'm Katie Shelby. I'm the educational leader here at Mujeres Unidas. I'm going to share my screen. Second. Okay. And I'm happy to share what happened with our project last year. It was for our level 2 ESOL students, and it was about information literacy and reading and analyzing news and validating information. And in journalistic fashion, I'm going to present the project in sort of the who, what, where, when, why, and then finally the how of how it was developed, starting probably most importantly with the what. So similarly to most of the other presenters today, when we were first thinking about what our project could be for the 2020-2021 academic year, this was in March 2020, and I remember sitting on my couch for one of the first days working from home and not knowing what the next school year would look like, not knowing what the rest of that school year would look like, really. One of the things that we were really concerned about for our students in that time, not just our students, also ourselves, is just accessing information, especially about the pandemic, but accessing correct, authentic information, how to know where to go for the right sources, the right recommendations, the right data. And we wanted to ensure that we were helping our students navigate all of this, especially in English, but even in their own languages. And so with that in mind, we developed this project with these 3 goals. The first one being, I know there's a lot of text here, sorry. But the first one being just raising students' awareness of this importance of verifying information that you read, especially online, especially on social media, relying on trusted sources. And when you have a claim, being able to support it with verified evidence and facts. And then through doing this, also meeting the language skills, the digital literacy skills, and the other standards of our existing curriculum for level 2. And then with all of this in mind, we were hoping for the end result to be that the students would actually create their own newsletter where they would research information to write articles, write those articles, edit them, and then compile them together as a class newsletter on topics of their choosing. So the why, kind of already touched on this, but we wanted students to be able to, after leaving this class, to be able to just have the skills necessary, sort of a toolkit that when they read something online or they get something forwarded to them on social media or in a WhatsApp group, so just stop and think, like, where did this information come from? Who is sending it to me? What is the source? What evidence is there to back this up? And the initial thoughts around this were definitely the beginnings of the COVID-19 pandemic, but as the school year developed, that then turned into also just everything with COVID-19, then the vaccination rollout, and then also at the time, that was when the presidential campaigns for 2020 were definitely starting to heat up, but then again, throughout the course of the class, that turned into then the election, and then the aftermath of the election, and then just so many other current event topics that happened over the last year and a half. I know you all know. And there's just some, and our students would bring in different social media articles or different WhatsApp scams would get passed around our school. And we just were really mindful of what they were being exposed to, and we just wanted to give them the tools they would need to be able to analyze these correctly. So the who, when, where, I can kind of combine here. It ended up being our level 2 class, and we actually, through our AmeriCorps member last year, Elisa, she's the one that's highlighted there. We were able to offer an ESL 2 plus class, which was great for the students that were they were not really able to meet all of the goals of ESL 2 in the spring of 2020 with all the COVID-19 interruptions. So they weren't quite ready to move on to our level 3 class. But with this additional project, we were able to differentiate this a bit from the other ESL 2 classes with this extra reading and writing and critical thinking focus. And we didn't really realize when we first developed this project that the entire school year would be on Zoom, but it was. and they did it all on Zoom. So here's some of the students. They're not all on this picture, but so now the how. So we outlined a series of topics to go with the existing curriculum. We tried to match these topics with the topics that were already in the curriculum for this class anyway. And then with the last few months of the year, really focusing on students drafting, researching, writing, and editing their articles. Here's just some examples. So topics that they covered, more discussion based throughout the year. Again, the importance of verifying information, like why do we even need to? Why can't we just believe everything we read or hear on television or hear on the radio? Different sorts of bias in the news, how to analyze a source to see what the purpose or the intent behind the news might be, our own biases when we read or hear something. And then again, the importance of being able to support a claim with evidence, not just having an opinion because that's your opinion, but why is that your opinion? And then again, trustworthy versus untrustworthy news sources, different like warning signs, different links. We really focus on social media and WhatsApp because that's where our students get a lot of their information. So just how to analyze a post to see if it's authentic or if there's any warning signs there. Distinguishing fact from opinion, especially with some of the nuances in the English language that students might not pick up on. And then just different types of news, like opinion versus fact versus news versus feature stories. And then different skills that they practice throughout the year. Quoting and paraphrasing. They spent a long time on paraphrasing. The importance of creating citations and bibliographies, structure of a paragraph, structures of an article, and then how and why to conduct research and then compile that research into an original writing. And so these are just a couple examples of different slides that Elisa created throughout the year. She's much more talented at creating slideshows than I am, but they went through different sources for fact checking, like Snopes and AP News. They looked at real contemporary examples. Not everything was about the presidential election or COVID-19. She found lots of different contemporary examples. And one WhatsApp scam actually went throughout our student body, something about enter your contact information and send it to 5 friends, and then you get like something about COVID relief. It was not real, but one student got it, sent it to her whole class, then it got to all the other classes. So during this class, it was a very great example of things to verify when something might be a scam. And then again, the importance of verifying information. They did lots of different lessons and had a lot of discussions about this with real articles. And then the exciting part, the final newsletter. So they actually voted on which topic to focus on as a class. And they ended up being split 50-50 on if they wanted to focus on COVID-19 or if they wanted to focus on homelessness in Boston. And so Elisa said, why not do both? So they did both. So some students focused on different topics related to homelessness in Boston, causes, support services, things like that. And others focused on COVID-19 and everything that entailed. And this was in the spring. So this is when the vaccine started being readily available for people. So the exciting final result now is not here, sorry, here. So this is the newsletter. Elisa ended up compiling all the articles together, but you can see the list. These are all the article titles. Some students worked together, some wrote their own, but you can see that there were 3 or 4 different articles about homelessness and then 5 or 6 about COVID-19 and the reopening plans and the vaccination. And the writing, we're just so proud of what they were able to write and the research that they did and the way that they compiled data. You could really see paraphrasing language, signaling vocabulary, quotations. They have bibliographies. I just highlighted 2 parts in particular here. The one on this was one of the students that wanted to write about homelessness in Boston, and she was actually in a shelter with her children while she was in the class. And so the first part of the article was more just about homelessness in general, but then she chose to make it more of a reflection, a feature piece where she wrote about her own experiences with homelessness. And I don't think without this project, I don't think that something such a piece of writing so genuine and honest would have necessarily come out of the class. And then, so you can see here, it says, yeah, it's very sad for a mother to expose a child to go through the situation. Your pain is double for you and for them. It's really powerful. And then the one on the right, this is one of the students that chose to focus on COVID-19. And this is not quite so personal, but you can see that she was summarizing what she heard on the news with COVID-19 and really reporting on the numbers and trying to put what she heard from the news in her own words, but with keeping the same sentiment. And so you can see a lot of the skills that they learned throughout the year in practice here. And then, so I didn't put a slide here, but we did survey the students at the end of the year to see if they enjoyed the project, if they found it useful, and the response was overwhelmingly yes. They all of them said that they would always think twice before they believe something they read online, when we didn't want to make them all so paranoid about everything they see. But we are glad that they at least are stopping to think before they just read something and immediately believe it, immediately share it with all their friends and family. We just want them to have the tools to know that not everything on, especially again on social media or in WhatsApp messages, is authentic, and just to be able to check the source, verify where the information is coming from, draw your own conclusions, not just believe everything you read, and to develop their English and their digital literacy skills at the same time. So two essential resources that Elisa used last year are this blog from Kathleen Morris and also this other website called Checkology. These are both linked here in the slides, and I'm happy to share this presentation with anyone. Also, here's my email. The co-director of MUA, Johanna Malone's email, our website, Facebook. Feel free to reach out with any more information if you'd like to see more of the students writing. And yeah, thank you to First Literacy for making this possible. And thank you all.
Well, Katie, thank you so much. You know, when we looked at this project originally, it seemed to me the student engagement piece would be really high, and we all know how important it is to engage our students and have them be excited. And this skill of being able to think about sources is so important. It's more important now than it ever has been before, and it's always been important. And so, you know, the skills, the student engagement and the skills that you taught your students are really valuable, and we were just honored to be part of this project with you. There's no questions, but I'm seeing in the chat a lot of really great comments. So people like the project too. Thank you so much. And without further ado, we will turn now to the International Institute of Boston and their project with Natalie Patalino.
Hi, everyone. Brian, are you able to make me a co-presenter?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Natalie Patalano. I'm the education manager at the International Institute of New England at the Boston location. Caroline mentioned she is the managing director for IINE in Lowell, that we are a refugee resettlement agency. We provide robust services for immigrants and refugees from many demographics. My experience working with the Institute over the last 3 years has primarily been in teaching ESOL and developing curriculum, as well as advising students one-on-one. So our project this past year with the First Literacy Lab grant was to be able to provide makeup classes for students to reduce barriers to participation and to improve our retention rates. So I'll give a little overview of our program and then the steps we took to creating this extra service to ameliorate our program. So at IINE Boston, we offer 4 distinct levels of ESOL. We have terms of 15 weeks each, so we run in trimesters, and we offer rolling admissions, so students can start whenever there's a seat available. We do this in part to fulfill our grant compliance and also to give students the opportunity to start when it's convenient for their schedule. Our classes are English immersion. Everything is taught completely in English from level 1 to level 4. And our classes range from hours in the morning with levels 1 and 2, and evening classes for our intermediate and high intermediate levels 3 and 4. So typically when we think about before the pandemic and also immediately following the pandemic start in FY21, when we reevaluated our program retention rates and participation, we noticed that about 25% of our students were not able to regularly attend classes due to issues that were largely out of their control: childcare commitments, transportation, work scheduling, illness or health, and access to high quality internet. Internet access was something that became a more prevalent barrier after the pandemic started. But as a positive outcome, it forced us to really focus on developing the services we provide for students for their digital literacy skills. So responding to student barriers to attending in FY21, with the help of the first Literacy Lab grant, we developed this project to support distance learning for students that may have barriers to attending. In response to providing more restorative and equitable education services, we tried to implement this in part to make our enrollment and retention response less punitive and, again, more restorative for students who have issues that are out of their control. So we really focused on developing our analysis of retention and how we could make it better. So we integrated these makeup classes to complement online learning. So in the initial stages, the former education manager, Hillary, and myself, my previous role was education coordinator, developed methods for online classes. We determined the frequency of classes and the duration. Part of the problem solving that we had to do was accommodating makeup classes on a regular basis that could serve students across all 4 of our levels, from beginner to advanced. And so in doing that with relatively limited bandwidth for the hours that we could spend, we divided our instructional format into synchronous sessions. So we offered makeup classes every Friday from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. This was available to students at all levels. We typically saw students from levels 3 and 4 joining class. It tends to be a trend in part because students in levels 1 and 2 are more often new Americans who may be waiting on work authorization or may have more ability to attend class regularly because they're still setting up their lives here. So for students that were lower, that maybe couldn't participate in the group discussions as easily, we also offered one-on-one virtual check-ins and sessions where we would review homework with them or perhaps review a class recording, work on them on developing digital literacy skills, etc. We also had 2 Commonwealth Core career readiness specialists who assisted us in creating and disseminating remote instruction video tutorials to students, which proved to be really helpful. We did it in a visually and linguistically accessible manner that allowed us to reach students with low literacy skills remotely while we were not able to meet in person. And then we also offered some extra self-directed practice. Our objective for FY21 was to serve 20 unique students and measure their learning and gain outcomes to check the effectiveness of our programming. Oops. Okay, so for program planning, I and the former education manager participated in 2 professional development trainings, one with Sabes Tech and Tel, developing digital literacy learning plans for students. The other was an authentic internal training where we used the resource Learning Teaching by Jim Scrivener to be able to teach to mixed level classes and provide high quality differentiated instruction. Okay. Our next step was, because we have 4 classes and multiple instructors, we had to make sure that communication was effective and productive. So we would meet once per week at our education staff meetings, and instructors would communicate with myself and with the education manager about what lessons the students would be learning that week. They would submit their lesson plans to us. And if the students were to miss, how we could facilitate assisting them in the makeup session. This was initially not the easiest goal to achieve, but to respond to it, we simultaneously developed our curricular resources so that the topics and the content for each unit of instruction across levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 was essentially the same and was a scaffolded approach so that the students, regardless of which level they were coming in from, were working on the same topic content with difference in grammar, of course. And then we talked about that as well. One-on-one sessions available upon request. And as mentioned, the instructors would share their lesson materials with the program coordinator and manager each week. Primarily levels 2, 3, and 4 students would attend the live sessions, and then we would provide one-on-one support to students in level 1. Instructors would provide feedback on students and highlight areas where they may need extra support. And we used the Massachusetts DESE and ACLS policies to guide our evaluation. We also implemented pre and post testing, which we tracked separately for the students that attended makeup classes. Lastly, throughout the year and also towards the end of the year, we administered regular oral and written assessments to the students depending on their level, their proficiency level. And students were assessed for learning gains in listening, speaking, reading, writing, and grammar and context. Let's see. A little bit about our scope and sequence. Our topics ranged from digital literacy skill building, targeted skill building with Zoom basics, Gmail, Google, etc., and also integrated, such as responding to an email or navigating a website, avoiding scams, things like that. Current events, cultural and anthropological topics, health literacy and well-being. We checked in pretty regularly with the students to make sure that they had updated information about COVID vaccinations and facts for vaccines. And then civics, holidays, important events, historical figures. And we did a mixture of conversation, listening, reading, vocabulary, and sometimes grammar and context. We do a pretty heavy grammar focus in the classroom, so we didn't prioritize grammar as heavily in the makeup classes. This is an example that our Commonwealth Core Career Readiness Specialists created. They made 7 videos, instructional videos that are linguistically accessible for students for Zoom and Google Basics, and ways to access both applications via computer, Android devices, and iPhones. Some of the resources that we used, ESL Library and Lingua House, highly recommend for supplemental ready-made materials. It's definitely very difficult to coordinate in a timely manner between your instructional staff when you have 2 different people teaching the same material essentially. So we tried to make the lessons pretty easily accessible and adaptable to student needs. We also used and adapted articles from the Washington Post and BBC, NPR, the Change Agent magazine, Grammar in Context, and various conversation question resources online and in print. And lastly, our outcomes for the year. Our objective was to serve 20 unique students. We served 32 unique students in FY21. It proved to be really successful programming. 25 of our 32 students had a learning gain in FY21. It's about 78%. So we were pretty happy with that, especially for the first time around. And we were also able to improve our teaching methods and our ability to provide differentiated instruction, whether that be pairing a higher level student with a lower level student for conversation, or providing an adapted article to one group where another group has a higher level article. Yeah, and it also improved our internal rapport and our ability to keep in check with our students, which is more difficult to achieve remotely. So, and that's that.
Great. Well, Natalie, thank you. It's so wonderful to, hear the mindset of restorative, and social justice in your programming. I think that's so important because we really need to meet students where they're at and help them and help elevate them. And I think that's such a great mindset that you have. So thank you so much. There's a few questions that we're gonna have to skip just because we're running short on time. But I suggest, I know David Rosen and Doris Lowy had some questions, and maybe they can connect with you offline here. And so without further ado, our last but certainly not least presenter from the Care Center and Holyoke Community College Adult Learning, Alison Reed.
Thanks, everyone. Just get my slides up. So my name, as Brian said, is Alison Reed. I work with the Holyoke Community College Adult Learning Center on a normal basis. And on this, we partnered with the Care Center. We work with the Care Center on a number of initiatives there, both high-set programs located in our small little city in Holyoke in Western Massachusetts. So I'm really glad to represent both of them. Our project was called Teams, so Teacher Excellence and Mentoring Support. I loved all of the projects focusing on student learning, and our project was a bit different. We were motivated by thinking about, we've got this really good teaching team, and I and one of the administrators kept having conversations about, we've got good teachers and we want them to be able to continue to grow in their practice. And that's really hard in the day-to-day of life. So we wanted to really think through what's a model that would give them the space and the support to more authentically pursue goals, get support, become even better. We wanted to come really firmly from a place of recognizing that we had a great teaching team and great teachers still want to continue to improve. And the problem statement we had identified for this is simply time. So there's never enough time in the professional development workshop. And I say that as both a participant and a facilitator. Even if you've got a nice, long, expansive time, you're always making decisions about what do we put in, what do we take out? Do we have enough time to implement? Do we have enough time to deliver all the content? There's just never enough. Teachers' work lives, we might go to a great workshop, we might come back with great inspiration, and then we get back to our real lives, and there's lessons to get out the door, and there's students having a crisis, and there's 17 emails that just came in, and it's hard to actually have the time and the headspace to really think through, okay, I had this great idea, how would I integrate it into my practice? And we realized as well that administrators who were coming from a place of really wanting to support their teachers also didn't have enough time. I worked with the administrators at both of these programs and a group of others in our area. And we all went through a year-long professional development series about how to provide really good observation and support for teachers. We brought in an expert, we worked on this model, and then life happened and none of the administrators had any time either, because they also had 17 emails and things that had to happen. And so all that goodwill, all that intention was really just being limited by the fact that we're busy. And so we wanted to give some thought to how do we address that? How do we get some time and some bandwidth and some focus to really give teachers the kind of support that they would most benefit from? So I actually feel like a lot of our best work for this was in the planning stages. So we're a collaboration of two HiSET programs. We invested in some teacher stipends to give teachers a few more hours of professional development time and some time for me to be a mentor teacher so that somebody had a little bit of time carved out in their job to do this and it wouldn't get shoved off the to-do list. And then we worked through this model, which I love. We would gather together and we'd start off by coming together and reflecting. What are we doing well? What do we want to work on? And we wanted to identify both of those, both strengths and goals. And we wanted that to come from a sincere conversation with teachers, not an external goal from somebody or not the newest flavor of the month that was coming down the pipe, but honestly, as teachers thinking together with peers, where are we strong? Where could we be stronger? And then each teacher we hoped would develop their individual action plan and saying, okay, after that conversation, what's the specific thing I want to work on? Who can I work with? One of our sort of sub goals was to build a culture where we knew that the teachers were strong, but did everybody else know each other's strengths and were we able to support each other? So we wanted teachers to identify somebody who they could check in with as a peer and observe a class or borrow a resource or have coffee and brainstorm. And then I would be working with teachers as they implemented their plans. I would be coaching and mentoring and keeping accountability and all those things. And we'd come back together to gather and reflect on our success and think about where we went next. I got to say, I love this model. It felt like it was pulling together a lot of really good thinking that a number of us had been doing separately. And like everybody else said, we made this plan in spring 2020. And clearly everybody else was more on the ball than we were, because we were thinking clearly this COVID remote teaching thing, it's going to end at some point, and we can get back to what we do best and really being our best selves. So we were really imagining maybe September, maybe the beginning of the year will be this pandemic thing, but at some point we'll be back in person. And we'll want to get back and reset back into sort of our best selves and our zone of competence, as opposed to kind of the scramble that spring 2020 was. That was our hope. And then reality, of course, was Zoom. One of our programs was remote, entirely remote all year. One was doing hybrid teaching, and both of those were really challenging for teachers. The remote teaching continued to feel like an emergency scramble. We were all learning every week how to do each of the different things and how to adapt to the different challenges that came up. And the hybrid teaching, while teachers appreciated being not on Zoom, it was also just really challenging to feel exposed on a daily basis, to worry about whether I'm going to get COVID and is this a safe thing to be doing. So this ended up being this really heavy background for what we had hoped would be a really aspirational project. I'm imagining many of you are familiar with this, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I've been thinking about it a lot in the pandemic. The idea is that at the bottom, there are needs like food and shelter and warmth and safety and connection with others. And up at the top are things like self-esteem and mastery and fulfillment and realizing our best selves. And our program design was all up at the top. And then we all spent a lot of the year dealing with stuff at the bottom and with Wi-Fi. This is the 2020 edition of the Maslow's hierarchy of need. So this meant that really a lot of our teachers were in survival mode. Every day they were just trying to get through, how do I do this next week? How do I do this next lesson? How do I troubleshoot this one thing? And time and bandwidth for thinking about goals were in really short supply. So this was a really different headspace than we had imagined and that we were all used to operating in say, February of 2020. But it was where we were at for all of last year. And I'm sure that's true for everybody else. This meant we had to adapt. So all of those gatherings that we had hoped would be warm and cozy were on Zoom. We did a lot of talking about how do you set goals in a pandemic? And so when I made the action planner, I also distributed this little addendum about how could you think about goals in a challenging time? A goal might not be what it would have been 2 years ago. It might be something about self-care. It might be about maintaining connections or just getting through, or about looking forward and thinking about how do we come out of this eventually, whenever that happens. And trying to help people rethink this question of growth when we were in such a survival mode kind of thing. It also meant adjusting expectations for action plans. We had envisioned very specific action plans with SMART goals, and we would check if we achieved them. And I found that for some teachers that was realistic, and for other teachers that wasn't. And the action plan had to be, we'll keep in contact and we'll keep talking, and every couple of weeks or every week we'll check in and we'll have a conversation about how you're doing. And that the action plan then was having an ongoing conversation about teaching and letting the steps and the support that they needed flow from that. It also meant that we got to a point in June where we were supposed to do another gathering, and it was pretty clear that everybody was really tired of Zoom. And so instead of having another Zoom gathering, we encouraged people to do some personal reflection and provided some resources for that. And that just felt like the compassionate thing to do at that point, that when we were really thinking about how do we support our teachers, at that point, supporting our teachers meant giving them a break from Zoom. And that was a kind of support we had not anticipated, but that felt really real. In this context, what teachers ended up working on was very much 2020, 2021. People were talking about how do I integrate digital skills? Like everybody said, many of us had digital literacy classes, and then we realized that, yes, we had digital literacy classes, but our students didn't necessarily have the skills they need. So how do we integrate those? How do we move our existing academic curriculum into remote platforms? Can we build out digital and digital first or digital parallel curricular materials and activities that would support students when they were in either remote or hybrid? There's also a lot of work about how do we support students to do a different kind of education. For some students, working asynchronously was really challenging. They were not used to doing homework. They had busy lives. And so this question about how do I organize my time, my motivation, my childcare so that I can do work when a teacher is not sitting right next to me was really challenging. And the teacher was thinking about how do I build some of that skill building and some of that planning into my academic content. Others were thinking about how do you build engagement. Our students were very much in survival mode, even more than our teachers. And so one of our programs is really invested and has a beautiful model where we say, we do high school equivalency, but we do high school equivalency with art classes and poetry classes and physical education and field trips and all of these really rich sources. And in a pandemic, those aren't necessarily on the test. And so how do you encourage students to make the space for a poetry class in a pandemic? How do you find high ceiling, low floor activities that students can enter in occasionally, if occasionally is all they can get there for? And of course, tech skills. So our teachers' tech skills, as well as our students. And for many students, for many teachers, it was just about getting through it. I had a couple of teachers who said to me something like, I'm just operating day to day. It feels really good to have someone to talk to about all of that. And there was not a single specific theme because every week was something different. And so we would just respond. I'd have a conversation and we'd say, all right, so how can I support you? What can you work on to make next week a little bit better? And steps would emerge. And then the next week we'd check in, or 2 weeks later we'd check in and we'd see how that week was going. And that was not the vision, but it was where people were at. So that coaching here in pandemic land ended up being, I observed Zoom class or going off and gathering resources and sharing. So, okay, I want to do this curricular work. I want to build in some resources for my students to think through how to do asynchronous work. Alison, can you help me explore curricular models? Can we find materials that would help me to do that? And then, of course, a lot of Zoom and phone one-on-one kind of conversations. The takeaways from all of this. So 2021 was not really the awesomest year to try to do action plans and SMART goals. And it really mattered to have caring, supportive conversations with teachers. My biggest takeaway was how important it was that I had the time built into my work life to call somebody up and say, how are you doing? How's it going? What's up? That was something that nobody had the time for, because as busy as administrators were before the pandemic, they were scrambling even harder this year. And teachers needed it even more than this year. And this is still the PD model I wanted as a teacher. So as much as there were specific elements that were just not realistic this last year, I love this model. I'm glad we did the work for it. And I'm hoping we find a way to implement it in the future, because I think it really captured a lot of what, as a teacher, I would have wanted to help grow. And I think, yeah, so if people have questions, follow up. I've got 2 emails. One is my work email. One is the email I use for miscellaneous other stuff. Feel free to contact me at either.
Great. Well, Alison, thank you so much. And, many of you know I come from a K through 12 education background. And, my first year teaching, I think I had something like 12 or 15 days where I would get a substitute teacher and I would go do PD with my mentor. And, our adult educators deserve teachers that have those resources too. And so this is, something we all need to think about as we talk to our policymakers about what we do and what we need to do it really well. So, Alison, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yes, sorry.
That's okay.
By the chat.
We're a little bit over time. I want to thank, Dr. Rudd for enlightening us on this health literacy issue, which makes so much sense and must be a real struggle for some. I want to thank all of our 6 partners who presented. You really turned our money into these great results, and we're so thankful. And I also wanted to point out, I do believe there are, as attendees, there are several donors with us. And, a reminder, First Literacy gets 100% of our funds through private donations and grants. And so, if there's any donors on this call, thank you so much for your support, because you help make this happen. Those are my remarks. I posted so next week we will send this recording, a link to this recording to everybody who attended, as well as some resources from our presenters that they've shared with us as part of their grants. I posted a link if anyone wants to join us in a next Zoom call for some informal networking. You can consider it like standing up and walking out the door and talking on your way out if you would like. And if you can't attend, we totally understand. So with that, I will say thank you. And we will see anyone who would like to join us for networking in the networking room. But thank you everybody so much, and keep up the great work.
And I'll just add a thank you to Brian for putting this together. And I hope you all have a great weekend.